here we are, guys. The Last of Us has premiered on HBO Max. Brought to us by Craig Menzin? Hopefully I remembered his name correctly. And also Neil Druckmann, the man behind The Last of Us series, bring us an adaptation of the critically acclaimed first game, The Last of Us, in The Last of Us series. For those who have never played the game or are not familiar with it, a survivor named Joel has to escort this young girl named Ellie across the quarantine zone in Boston, as well as post-apocalyptic America, because she's a very key importance in the survival of humanity. Anyone who's been following me for a while, you know how much I love The Last of Us, and for those of you who don't, it is my all-time favorite video game. Probably the best game I've ever played in my entire life. I expressed that in my review that I did a couple years back, and like in that one, I am rocking the flannel apocalypse shirt, because it's necessary. Got a little scruff going on, you can't really see it, but, well, I tried. 10 years after the release of the first game. That's actually really interesting that they decided to put it out this year. But like with any adaptation of something, a lot of changes have been made to the story. Instead of 2013, the opening takes place in 2003, and when the 20-year time jump occurs, it's the current year, 2023, instead of 2033. And we get to see more of a glimpse of what life was like before the outbreak happened, or as it was happening. And it also fills in gaps and makes things more complete with certain things, like with Tommy, and also explaining how Marlene managed to convince the Fireflies that Ellie was very important to get to Salt Lake City, where they were experimenting with the vaccine. When it comes to video game adaptations, almost everybody on this platform on YouTube has said most of the time, when you adapt a video game into live action, most times it doesn't work. As far as the ones that I've seen, they're okay. Mortal Kombat from 2021, that was alright, I guess. I'm not a fan of those games, I can't really say, but I think for the most part it was enjoyable and harmless fun. Uncharted, which I'm a really big fan of, also brought to us by Naughty Dog Studios, was not that bad actually, although it could have been better in a lot of ways, but I didn't expect it to be. Hopefully the sequel, if it ever comes out, will be better, but that's besides the point. But there was talk for many years of adapting The Last of Us into live action. At one point I think they were considering making it a feature film, with Sam Raimi being attached as a producer or a director. If I remember correctly, Neil Druckmann said that no, that's not a good idea because it's not enough time to feel the full emotional impact that the story provides you in the game. So after a while, HBO Max decided to take the idea of The Last of Us by making it into a series. Everybody else would agree that was probably the best move, because you need as much time as you can to delve into certain areas of this world and showing things to people that are not familiar with The Last of Us universe. Showing us what drives the characters, what makes them tick, what's their motivations, and how they survive in this really desolate, dark world. As far as other changes, the spores are not included in this either. There's tendrils instead, whatever those are. Saw some fan reactions on social media that they weren't really too pleased with it. I'm just gonna wait and see what they do. With adaptations, it's natural stuff like that's gonna happen. You're gonna change certain things in order for it to make sense in a certain type of medium. And actually the reasoning behind them not going in that direction with the spores was that if they were spreading all over the area, it'd be impossible to contain it if it were to spread all across the air. And to be honest, that actually makes a lot of sense. We'll see what they do with the tendrils though. From what we see with the one runner that has them coming out of its mouth,
It's cool, it was disgusting.
bottom line, I was excited about what they were going to do with this, considering the creative talent that was behind it, and Neil Druckmann has a creative voice in this production, so I know that the show is in good hands, and he's not going to allow certain things that don't make sense to happen in the show. But as far as the first episode, the opening of this, there's a talk show that takes place, I believe in the 1960s or 70s, where these two scientists are talking about the cordyceps fungus, which is what the infection is based off of, where in the real world it infects ants. The talk show host says, well, humans aren't affected by that, are they? There's no evidence to say that it isn't, but if it gets a little warmer with the temperature all year round, that could change everything. The way that opening scene breaks it down and explains just exactly what could happen if that were to happen in real life, I was shaking. Just the thought of that scared me. Just like in the first game, it doesn't necessarily go into the science of it per se, but the way they present it, it makes you go, huh, yeah, I could see that happening. And I love the fact that they got Gustavo Santaolalla, again, I hope I said that name correctly, the composer from the previous games. They got him to do the musical score in this game, and I think a lot of it is more or less recycled because they use the musical cues from the opening title sequence in the first game, but it's still just as captivating as it was the first time around. The graphics that they use with the fungus sprouting across the screen or on the ground, and with the title logo forming around it, oh man, I don't want to sound like I'm fanboying out, but I could not stop laughing and smiling the whole time. Then we get introduced to Sarah, and we get to see what her life is like in the pre-apocalyptic world. It takes place in the year 2003, and one of the biggest notable obvious cues that it was in that time frame, you hear a song by Avril Lavigne playing in the background, the song Tomorrow. I listened to that album Let Go so many times when I was younger. I know the songs when I hear them. And it was actually kind of sad when you think about it in the context of the story, knowing what's going to happen eventually. And maybe I'm reading too much into it. I'm getting excited just talking about this stuff. We see her in school, interacting with her neighbors, one of them who is a woman restricted to a wheelchair who begins to act up very strangely and starts spazzing out with her body movements, and it turns out she's infected with the cordyceps. Given that this is the pre-social media era in the year 2003, social media was somewhat starting to become a thing at that time with Facebook and MySpace. You didn't really get the news that quickly like we do now. We hear little bits of it on the radio or the TV in the background that's playing. For all of us who played the games or have watched the gameplay footage online, we all know what's coming. For anyone who's not familiar with it, they know at least something's going to happen, that it's going to get intense later on. The tension is stretched out to the point where you're just waiting and waiting. The slow burn is definitely there, but it doesn't take too long to get to that moment of peak tension. We also get to see how she was able to get her dad's watch fixed and give it to him for his birthday, and how the woman who's one of the co-owners of the shop pushes her out the door right when the watch is being finished. We're close. Something's going on out there. We're close. Get yourself back to safety. All the cop cars are whizzing by, more than usual, and helicopters are flying around, adding more and more to the tension, and everybody's going, that's odd. You don't usually see that much every day. At one point, Sarah asks if it's a terrorist attack. Given that this is the year 2003, 2 years after 9/11, it would be a logical question to ask people if something really scary was happening. All the little things that they recreate, similar lines of dialogue from the first game, but it doesn't feel like it's so obvious that it's catering to the fans. It's done in a way that feels appropriate for the adaptation, adding something for the general audience while still giving the fans what they want. The joke that Joel pulls on Sarah when he can't really tell if the watch is working or not when it actually is, and she gives him Curtis the Viper Part 2, the movie series that he apparently really likes, which is a reference to the second game when Ellie's talking to Dina about watching a movie with Joel at one point. I really like that they're respecting Last of Us Part 2 despite the backlash it received from the fans. I'm gonna try not to bring that up too much because I know that Last of Us Part 2 is a touchy subject, but like it or not, it's considered canon. We also get to see why Joel left Sarah in the middle of the night when he put her to bed. Tommy got into some trouble and needed to be bailed out of jail. We delve more into Tommy's backstory and how he was kind of getting himself in trouble too much when he couldn't control his temper. I guess you could say that that's very in vain of what Tommy was actually like in the games. He was a bit of a hothead and didn't really think before he acted. As described by one of the creators of the game, Joel is warm, yet kind of dangerous. And in this episode, they show it and then some. Pedro Pascal as Joel, spot on casting. When they announced him as Joel, I thought,
genius.
What, are you looking for a raise? Get out.
He doesn't look exactly like Joel. Bella Ramsey doesn't look exactly like Ellie, but I don't really think that's necessary. If you remember, Alden Ehrenreich didn't look exactly like Harrison Ford, but they got the feel of the character down in that movie. And in this series so far, I think they do the exact same thing, although Pedro Pascal adds some different flavors of Joel in this one. His accent, for one, is a lot more subtle. It's not so obvious like it was in the game, but there's certain things that he says or the way he enunciates or accents his voice that you could tell that he's from the Texas area. A lot of that is due to the writing as well, but I like how they show a different side of Joel. We see more of his warm and caring personality and not so much of his standoffish type of behavior, like we saw in the first game. And just to be clear, when I make comparisons like that, I'm not trying to fault the game for what it wasn't doing, because it was the intention of the game creators at the time. Now that we're many years away from the release, we've all had time to process it and discuss it and think about it. It gives us more freedom to look back on maybe what we could have delved into before, and in a show like this, it's a freedom that video games don't necessarily have. The show can do things that the video game couldn't, and vice versa. But then when Sarah finds the neighbors bitten and infected, which by the way, I'm really glad that that dog didn't die. If that dog was gonna die, I'm very sensitive when it comes to dogs dying, especially in fiction. I don't like seeing that, but anyway. The tension just builds even higher and higher and higher. Sarah is horrified at the fact that her father killed her neighbor, even though that's not really her neighbor anymore. Kind of like what Shaun and Shaun of the Dead said. That's not even your husband in there. I know it looks like your husband, but that's nothing of the man you loved in that car now. Nothing! Let's go, shall we? Then as they're riding in the car, we get all these little homages and touches to the original scene in the first game, where we see the farm burning, or Tommy's lines like, "A minute ago, newsman wouldn't shut up." And we see people running away from the runners, buildings blowing up, cars crashing, and planes crashing too. Which apparently this series is going to go into how the rest of the world was affected by the cordyceps. We don't really hear much of that in the games. If this show is going to expand on that, by all means, go for it. But that would make a lot of sense considering if people were coming from other infected areas of the country or around the world, the infection was going to spread onto the planes and cause the planes to crash, which instead of the car crashing into their car, the impact of the plane crashing behind them causes the car to flip over. The whole time watching this, from when the neighbor starts twitching in her wheelchair up to the eventual point when Sarah bites the big one, my heart was fluttering. I knew what was coming, I wasn't surprised, and it still wrecked me. Oh god, I'm gonna cry right now thinking about it. And in a way, the show enhances the death of Sarah, because whenever he goes to sleep for the rest of the episode, or when he eventually beats up that soldier that he was selling drugs to in order to protect Ellie, he gets flashbacks to what happened to Sarah all those years ago, thinking, I could have done something. She's only a kid. Why would you do that to a child? I'm already starting to jump ahead, but we'll get to that in a minute. But I really like how the show enhances all those things from the previous game to make it a lot more impactful in this series. Then we jump to 20 years later in the year 2023 in the quarantine zone in Boston. The remnants of the United States government, or FEDRA, running things in the quarantine zone, checking people if they're infected. This young boy manages to get to the wall and he tests positive. This female soldier says, how about we get you something to eat after we give you medicine? Will that be fine? We don't see the kid dying, because the thought of that is a lot more powerful and scary. Instantly took me right back to this moment in the first game when Tess and Joel are walking around the street and all these guys are getting checked by the soldiers to see if they're infected or not.
Get a life.
No, I'm not infected.
Hold her down.
This hand's wrong.
Do it.
Please.
Eyes forward.
This episode does a fantastic job showing how empty Joel is after everything that he's been through in the last 20 years. I've seen that death scene many times, watched plenty of people reacting to it as they played it the first time, watching it on YouTube anyway, still gets me. And even so, seeing how he's carrying all that pain deep down inside of him, Pedro Pascal is able to beautifully convey that look of pain without saying anything. Just one little twitch or change in his facial expression, you know exactly what's going on inside of his head. He's burying dead bodies in the quarantine zone, getting various assignments by picking up people's droppings. Not exactly an ideal situation, but you gotta do what you gotta do to survive in the apocalypse, especially in a quarantine zone. And the look of despair, the way that it's portrayed in the game, since you're the player, it makes you feel the weight of the world on everybody's shoulders, that this is a horrible situation and nobody's happy about this. Everybody is just depressed to the core. The soldiers are not happy about their assignments there. Joel and Tess are not too happy about it. Ellie doesn't really seem that thrilled. The Fireflies are pretty desperate. Everybody else is we're just doing what we gotta do here. This is our home. This is our life. They even show us Joel drinking alcohol on a regular basis every day, trying to bury all those feelings he has about Sarah, even though he can't repress his memories. Another thing that they expand on, which I like seeing. We get to see more of his relationship with Tess, that it was actually a romantic connection. In the game, they allude to it subtly, I suppose. Again, not the game's fault. I just like how the show expanded on that stuff. When it comes to Tommy, though, instead of leaving the militia group to go out and settle in Wyoming, he gets sent to Wyoming by Marlene, the Fireflies, for a special assignment. Joel's trying to track him down to see if he's okay. In the game, they were estranged because of some kind of disagreement that they had. Tommy bought into the Firefly ideology to restore peace and democracy back to the United States. Joel was not buying into the Firefly stuff, and he and Tommy basically butted heads for a while, and Tommy said, I don't ever want to see your face again. Supposedly that's what he said according to Joel in the first game. I can easily see Tommy saying something like that, though. We learned that through the conversation that Joel has with this guy on the radio who's hearing all kinds of messages from across the country, hearing all these different types of groups that are floating around the country, bandits, raiders. He might have even heard about the WLF over in Seattle, or the Seraphites in Seattle, or the Rattlers in Santa Barbara, who knows? But I really like that they got the original actress who played Marlene in the first game to be Marlene in this one. Shows you that they're still respecting what came before. Similar to the same voice actor of Cad Bane in the Boba Fett show, since I guess he was in the Clone Wars or Rebels. I don't know. Correct me on that politely, please. Which brings us to Ellie. This was the one aspect that I was really nervous about. From the little screen time that we get, she's not in the episode for that long, but Bella Ramsey is a huge revelation, just like how Ashley Johnson was the first time around. Her personality, her mannerisms, the way she just flips off people and talks trash to them when they talk trash to her, it is exactly Ellie pulled right out of the game. I remember specifically when Bella Ramsey was announced to be Ellie, I thought, oh god, no, she doesn't look a thing like Ellie. That's not gonna work. But then we get this moment in one of the trailers.
If she so much as twitches, don't.
Yeah, anyway, yeah. All right. So, anyway, what was I talking about?
And this is another reminder for me, never judge a book by its cover. Seeing how she's very similar to Joel, they don't get along at all the first time that they meet. Just like in the first game. Personalities clash, they're cursing at each other, snarking at each other. The unlikely scenario of a father and daughter-like bond. Everybody has said it, but the aesthetic of this whole thing, the production design, the costumes, the sets, absolute perfection. I don't like using that word, but it is pristinely... Oh my god. There's so many things that I was seeing with my own eyes, because I know the game inside and out, as well as the second game. Catching on to certain things, seeing the Firefly logos, the Lost in the Darkness quotes, the newspapers. There's probably a lot more that I'm covering that new Rockstars will be able to cover in full detail, I'm sure, if they haven't already. My god, the way they recreated this world. I thought it was going to look like a cheap imitation of it, but no. I absolutely love the look of this episode. I say episode because we have yet to see the rest of the series. But really quick, there was one image that I managed to screenshot in the preview of the rest of the series where we see the two towers leaning against each other in downtown Boston. We've seen glimpses of it at nighttime in the trailers, but seeing it during the daytime in live action, oh my god, I cannot wait to see what that looks like in the next episode. If it is the next episode. Which also kind of feels like they meshed 2 episodes into one for some reason. It feels like once Sarah dies, it's the end of one episode, and then the rest of it's another episode. I know other people have pointed it out, but I caught on to that too. I don't know if you guys have. So eventually they get flagged down by the soldier that Joel was selling drugs to. Ellie stabs him in the leg. He threatens to kill Ellie, but Joel just unloads on him and pounds him to a pulp to the point of death. Ellie's reaction to him doing that is very, very striking. Because as opposed to Sarah, who was very taken aback by what her father did, since it was pre-apocalypse, it was not normal to do that kind of stuff. Ellie is no stranger to violence and death. She too has killed to survive. But the fact that she sees this guy who's willing to do something for her, she likes that there's somebody there protecting her. Joel doesn't necessarily care much about Ellie at this point, but given that she's a kid, and that he's in the similar position that he was 20 years ago with Sarah, he knows that he could do something for her what he failed to do for his daughter. There's a lot of other things too that I didn't even mention. Robert's mission, where we chase after him when he rips off Joel and Tess, that's all taken care of apparently off screen, where Marlene and her Firefly bandits get into a fight with them or whatever over the car battery that he stole. And as far as Joel and Tess sneaking through the corridors in order to find Robert, they find a dead infected on the wall with the fungus spread all over the wall. But instantly I thought, there's our culprit. It's just a short scene, but it's an example of how you don't necessarily have to go into the extended action scenes nearly as much. Odds are there's going to be some stuff like that in the rest of the series in some capacity, but I like that they just keep it short to the point and don't really waste any time doing that stuff. That's really all I gotta say at the moment. I really love what we've seen so far. I am so excited to see what the other episodes bring to the table, how they're gonna portray Bill and Frank and Henry and Sam and Tommy, and the inevitable winter sequence with David in the restaurant. Oh boy. I am not looking forward to that, but I wonder who's gonna play David. I never looked into it. If it's Nolan North, oh jeez. That'd be hilarious. But it would be very meta, just like the actress for Marlene. But yeah, I love what we're seeing so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of the series brings. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've seen the episode, comment below and tell me what your thoughts are, and I'll see you guys in the next one.